Hello, everyone. We're going to do a review of the Bruckner and Fisher Why is Death Bad study questions. Number one, on the first page, sorry for the typo, the authors say, quote, "It is not unreasonable in certain cases to regard one's own death as a bad thing for oneself." What would Epicurus say to this? Why? That's just kind of like a basic test, right? I mean, that Epicurus would say that it is unreasonable to ever regard one's own death as a bad thing for oneself. Why? What would Epicurus say to this? Well, why would he say that? Because death is not something you ever experience, so it's not something you're ever aware of. So death is neither good nor bad. Number two, at the bottom of the first page, of the essay, the authors explain how, if death indeed is a bad for the person who dies, what kind of bad it would be. How do they characterize the kind of bad it would be? It's an unexperienced bad. Right? Let me just check that. Yes, it's an unexperienced bad. Uh, yeah, isn't that what they say? Hold on, let's make sure I get this right. Yeah, sorry, I just need to check it. Yeah, that's correct. The way they put it as at the bottom, they say that some things which are bad or evil for a person, such as pain, are experienced as bad by the person, whereas other things which are bad for a person, such as death, are not ever experienced as bad by a person. So things not ever experienced as bad by the person are unexperienced bads. That is, bads, even though they're not experienced as bad, which is really an outcome of Nagel's essay. Number three, what do the authors mean when they say we normally have asymmetric attitudes towards prenatal non-existence and posthumous non-existence? Just basically that we regard them differently, that we don't give them the same value, that we don't care equally about them, and we care more about posthumous non-existence and regard it as more important and a greater evil, certainly, than uh, prenatal non-existence. The authors explain, number four, that posthumous non-existence can be seen as a period of deprivation because, had we not died when we did, but later, we would have gone on to experience more of the goods of life. How do they suggest that prenatal non-existence can be seen as a period of deprivation? Well, just as the deprivations of posthumous non-existence depend upon when you died, the deprivations of prenatal non-existence depend upon when you were born. If we had not died when we did, but later, we would have experienced more of the goods of life. If we had not been born when we were, but earlier, we would have experienced more of the goods of life. So, prenatal non existence being a period of deprivation of goods depends on the idea that we could have been born earlier than we were, which is a major part of the essay. And you should see my videos on it, and you should definitely look at the video on the asymmetry problem. And that's what number five is about. What is the asymmetry problem? What would it mean to solve the asymmetry problem? Please look at that video. But basically, the asymmetry problem is the problem that we regard these two periods of non-existence, prenatal and posthumous, differently, asymmetrically. And it's a problem because that would seem to be irrational because it's inconsistent. That is, unless there's something fundamentally different about those two periods of non-existence, we should treat them the same, that is, symmetrically. And to solve the asymmetry problem means to provide that relevant difference, which would justify the asymmetric treatment. That is, if you could show that there were something that was relevantly different about posthumous non-existence as opposed to prenatal non-existence, then you could justify the asymmetric treatment, and that would be a solution to the problem. It would no longer be a problem. Number six, why do the authors reject Nagel's solution to the asymmetry problem? because they think that it's logically possible that you could have been born earlier than you were, and Nagel doesn't believe that. Number 7, what is Parfit's hypothetical on page 215 meant to prove? Well, that's Parfit's first hypothetical, and what it's meant to prove is that we have a temporal bias when it comes to bad things, that we would rather have them in the past than the future, and that we regard that as fully rational. This, that's what it's meant to prove. And so it would seem that it provides a kind of solution to the asymmetry problem, since it would justify us wanting having the bads in the past rather than the future. So we would care more about the future bads of posthumous non-existence. But number 8, why do the authors think that Parfit's hypothetical does not apply to a bad like death? Because they say that Parfit's hypothetical only makes sense for experienced bads, that is, bads experienced as bad by the person, and does not apply to unexperienced bads. And death is an unexperienced bad. 9, how is Parfit's second hypothetical on page 217 different from his first one? Because it deals with unexperienced bads experienced by someone else but not by you. And what the authors think is that points to the idea that we normally treat unexperienced bads symmetrically. So it would mean that we were being inconsistent with regard to the unexperienced bads of prenatal and posthumous non-existence. Number 10, explain why Epicurus would say that the only rational attitude toward prenatal and posthumous non-existence is to regard them as having the same value. Well, this obviously backtracks to the whole basis of the asymmetry problem. That Epicurus would say the only rational attitude towards these two things is to regard them as having the same value because they have no value. Neither of them has any value for us because it's not something that we would ever experience. Number 11, not yet being born deprived us of pleasures we would have had we been born earlier than we were. Dying will deprive us of pleasures we will experience if we die later than we actually will. Why do the authors think it is rational to care more about the latter than the former? Well, this is really their solution to the asymmetry problem, and that is that we would rather have our pleasures in the future, so we care more about future pleasures than we do about past pleasures. So we care more about future deprivations of pleasures than we do about past deprivations of pleasures. So we care more about posthumous non-existence than prenatal non-existence.